Hello, and welcome to the second video in our series about American general strikes. Today we're talking about a strike that has received renewed interest thanks to the recent victorious Hunts Point produce market strike. That's right, we're talking about the 1934 Minneapolis general strike in the next video. So I got a little carried away with this video and it ended up being kinda long, so I split it in two. In this video, we're going to talk about how leftists organized the Minneapolis trucking industry and what we can learn from them. In the 1920s, the Red Scare and capitalist opposition to trade unionism had turned Minneapolis from a city with a strong unionist spirit to one that prided itself with being an open shop city. The organization that was most responsible for this change was the Citizens Alliance, a formal group of Minneapolis entrepreneurs and businessmen founded in 1903. Don't be fooled by its name. It really didn't care about the state of citizens. The group's only concern was protecting industry by limiting the influence of unions. They went to great lengths to accomplish this by keeping a close eye on communists and activists, blacklisting organizers, and hiring spies to infiltrate unions. The Citizens Alliance also had two local papers on their side, the Minneapolis Tribune and the Minneapolis Journal. Unsurprising when you realize that the Dayton Company, owned by Citizens Alliance member George Dayton, contributed over $1 million annually to the Minneapolis Tribune in advertising. Something that is definitely a thing of the past. No, today capitalists outright own the press. Anyway, the result was between 1920 and 1934, only 9% of Minneapolis workers were unionized, with the Citizens Alliance successfully winning virtually every major strike prior to 1934. Minneapolis became known as the worst scab town in all the Northwest. So why and how did that change? To answer that, let's talk about the Great Depression. The Depression widened the gap between capital and labor considerably. The severe reduction in farming income resulted in widespread farm foreclosure, forcing many families into cities where conditions weren't much better. In Minneapolis, workers were earning as little as 35% their pre-depression wages. By 1933, there were 68,500 unemployed workers and 120 were on some sort of public assistance. It became clear to individuals like Trotskyist James P. Cannon that the conflict between labor and capital was going to take a radical new turn in the mid-1930s. What set Cannon apart was his opinion about where that turn would take place and by extension where revolutionaries should be. The Communist Party encouraged the creation of revolutionary unions where militant unionists could flock together away from the conservative unions of the AFL. Cannon believed that militant unionists needed to be in those conservative unions, arguing that's where the new conflict between labor and capital would take place. They needed to work within the AFL and engage in the actions that the AFL leaders wouldn't, such as organizing the masses of unskilled workers in the industries. Quick tangent. When I talk about conservative unionism in this video, I'm mainly talking about craft unionism, where workers are organized by trade or craft. Unions that followed this philosophy rejected industrial unionism organizing strategies because they believed unskilled, which there is no such thing, and semi-skilled workers were easily replaceable and therefore considered a waste of time. But more on that later. This brings us to the General Truck Drivers and Helpers Union Local 574, affiliated with the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, Chauffeurs, Stablemen, and Helpers of the American Federation of Labor. That's a mouthful, so I'm just going to call it the General Drivers, or Local 574 for short. It's estimated to have had less than 100 members to just under 200 members at the beginning of 1933. No wonder when their most radical recruiting event was a picnic. To be fair, it wasn't completely their fault. The Citizens Alliance spent $25,000 in 1916 to crush a Teamsters strike, and one Teamster claimed that prior to 1934, the Teamsters did not win a single strike in Minneapolis. Local 574 did not want to provoke more than the one coal yard they represented, believing that an organizing drive would certainly fail and lead to the local's demise. And speaking of the coal yards, if I was lucky, I'd get a loadout that was 2 ton, and for that I'd make $1, and $1 was more than a lot of guys made working all day. Truck drivers in the Minneapolis coal yards were paid by the ton to deliver coal to businesses and residences. At smaller companies, they provided their own trucks, often old Fords or Chevys, while at larger companies, trucks were provided for them, though either way they were paid the same. So if you hauled 2 tons of coal and it was $1 a ton, you'd make $2, but you was paying for the gas and oil in your truck. Drivers hired a helper who would shovel the coal onto the truck. Since most houses weren't right on the street, helpers would have to carry coal from the truck to the house. Shoveling and carrying coal was a physically demanding job that could only be performed with a good back. Some could carry 100 pounds at a time, while the older guys could often only carry 75 pounds at a time. The Teamsters were fine with representing both drivers and helpers, but were not keen on organizing inside workers, like the warehouse and yard workers inside the workplace, who made 20 to 30 cents an hour unloading boxcars and loading trucks. Workers in this industry were primarily needed when the weather was cold, since that's when folks buy coal. Though, because of the Depression, people only bought coal when they without a doubt needed it. This meant a lot of unpaid idle time, as workers only got paid for the time they worked. As Chris Moe put it, you went in there and sat in the doghouse all day, and maybe you got a ton to haul, and maybe you didn't. Sit there the whole week and maybe get a ton or two. In 1933, Trotskyists Ray, Mick, and Grant Dunn and Carl Skoglund began organizing coal yard truck drivers in Minneapolis. Ray Dunn was an active member of the Communist League of America opposition and had been an organizer in the IWW. As a wobbly, he traveled the country organizing various workers and strikes before ending up in Minnesota, where he worked at the Delattre-Dixon Coal Company for over a decade. He earned a reputation as a good, selfless organizer in the coal yards and knew hundreds of workers there thanks to being a weighmaster. The larger coal yards tended to distribute coal to several companies, which allowed him to talk to many different workers about unionizing. Along with his brothers Mick and Grant, Ray became an important organizer within the trucking industry. Another was Carl Skoglund, a Swedish immigrant and wobbly who had worked on the construction of the Northern Pacific Railroad and in lumber yards before moving to Minneapolis. There, he worked as a mechanic, organizing and participating in 2 strikes that ultimately got him blacklisted. Afterwards, he found a job in the coal yards and joined the General Drivers Local 574, where he attempted to push the union to organize all workers in the yards rather than just the truck drivers and helpers. He earned a reputation as a Red and was briefly kicked out, but he fought his way back in. Ray's connections with the yards, in addition to Mick and Skoglund's connections in Local 574, laid the foundation for organizing the coal yards, something they had been planning since 1928. They created an organizing committee which arranged workers' gatherings, anticipating that they would be able to organize the truckers at some later date. All the leadership of the General Drivers Union was opposed to the group, with the exception of Bill Brown, who became close friends with Mick Dunn and had grown tired of the union's conservative tactics. Brown, at this point president of Local 574, admitted coal drivers and yard workers to the union despite opposition from the local's council. The decision to start organizing yard workers was controversial, as their interests, while common, were not exactly the same as truckers or helpers, though it meant one less group that could be used to break the inevitable strike. And a strike was inevitable, as the organizers' ultimate goal was recognition of the union by employers, something they would never agree to without a fight. So now we could talk about how they organized the Minneapolis Teamsters strike, right? Not yet. Hold your horses. Get it? It's a Teamsters joke? Anyway, first we have to talk about the February strike. In January of 1934, coal dealers agreed to update the workers' wage scale, but refused to meet with union representatives or the Regional Labor Relations Board. On February 2nd, the workers voted to strike for February 7th unless the union was recognized, wages increased, and working conditions improved. So, an unusually warm winter in Minneapolis had given Local 574 few chances to strike. That is, until an unexpected cold spell happened in early February. With March fast approaching, coal orders needed to be filled if the companies wanted to earn much-needed profit. The organizers and members of Local 574 understood this and were ready to strike, but the Teamsters bureaucracy all the way up to President Daniel J. Tobin were not on board. They wanted the strike to be the absolute last option, and did everything they could to discourage the workers from striking. They appealed to the rank and file, stating that employers would not back down, that the legal system was not on their side or sympathetic to their cause, and threatened to withhold strike funds or decertify the local. In early February, a meeting of Local 574 and the Teamsters bureaucrats was held to plan to declare a strike. However, the bureaucrats rejected the motion to strike and it failed. At a second meeting, where the bureaucrats were not present, the men of Local 574 voted to strike almost unanimously for the primary goal of union recognition by the coal companies. A lot was on the line, but a victory could have favorable consequences. As Brown put it, the workers will come to us and we can organize the whole damn industry. On February 7th, workers on 62 coal yards walked off the job. This strike was incredibly well organized considering that so many workplaces were involved. There were large pickets at the largest depots, while smaller ones only needed bare-bones crews, led by picket leaders who were able to respond quickly to new developments. Best of all, there were roving pickets, strikers on cars and trucks known as the Flying Squadron, patrolling coal delivery routes to intercept scabs. When they came across a scab truck, they would engage in what I can only describe as a scene out of Mad Max Fury Road. They would intercept the truck, and a striker would hop on the running board, reach into the cab, and engage the handbrake, while another would hop onto the truck and pull the dump lever, dumping the coal in the middle of the street. In some cases, the truck was commandeered and the coal was taken to a working-class neighborhood and dumped in the middle of the street so folks who needed it could take it. The strikers were able to successfully keep scabs off the road and shut down most of the coal yards. The strike committee also organized some workers into a relief committee that delivered coal to those who needed it, such as the orphans' home and municipal hospitals. Both strikers were even paid the union rate by the Teamsters. After 2.5 days, the strikers were able to win a small wage increase. The Regional Labor Board negotiated on behalf of the coal yard employers, allowing them to save face since at no point did the employers sit down at the bargaining table with the union. From the employer's perspective, they had not recognized Local 574 as a bargaining agent for their workers. Despite that, Local 574 had proven its effectiveness to workers in Minneapolis' trucking industry. In the weeks following the February strike, Local 574's organizing teams signed up hundreds of workers representing industries from ice, coal, sand and gravel to market wholesale grocery, package delivery, department stores, and furniture outlets. Ray Dunn organized rank-and-file committees of coal yard drivers and helpers, gas and oil workers, market and food store workers, warehousemen, shipping room employees, packers, checkers and weighers, and dispatchers. These committees within Local 574 allowed it to become large enough to get gains from employers while flexible enough to handle the differences within the trucking industry. It was these committees that identified grievances and drew up demands from the bottom up. The union even received support from Minnesota Governor and former Labor Party member Floyd B. Olson, who in general supported working-class people and several radical policies that would improve their material conditions. Though, we'll see if he remains true to those ideals in the next video. In late April, Local 574 could boast that it had 3,000 members. They set their sights on 11 employers involved in the warehousing and distribution of fuel and produce. On April 30th, they announced their demands: the closed shop, minimum wage of 56 cents for a 40-hour work week, with overtime to accrue thereafter, which would equal an average weekly wage of $27.50. If the employers failed to accept the demands, they would go on strike. The organizers strategically set a strike date for May 16, 1934, as the movement of vegetables and fuel peaked during that time of year. The 11 trucking firms were caught off guard, but refused to negotiate with the union. Originally, just these trucking bosses organized to counter Local 574, but it soon became a loosely organized General Employees Committee of 166 different trucking firms, thanks to the Citizens Alliance. They knew the General Drivers Union wanted to limit the number of employers in the strike because it would be easier to manage, increasing the likelihood of success. By increasing the number of employers involved, the Employers Committee believed it would force the union into a larger strike and spread its resources thin. In the meetings leading up to the strike, both sides basically talked past each other. The Employers Committee once again refused to recognize the union, to the point that they almost never sat in the same room as union negotiators. The Regional Labor Board attempted to mediate any meetings between the two parties, though the employers didn't particularly respect their limited authority either. Eventually talks broke down, primarily over the demand of the closed shop, so on Monday, May 14th, Local 574 voted to strike at midnight. The General Drivers Organizing Committee was aware that the walkout was unavoidable. So in the couple of weeks prior to the strike, Local 574 prepared for one heck of a demonstration, much to the dismay of the Teamsters bureaucracy. Teamsters President Tobin was disturbed by the communist politics of Local 574's organizers and his decision to admit inside workers into the union. From his perspective, drivers and helpers could join Local 574, but dock loaders, warehousemen, clerks, dispatchers, checkers, traffic managers, and other workers could not. And it's here that I want to briefly talk about the problem with that strategy and craft unionism in general. Let's go through the different jobs of the trucking industry during the 1930s. There are drivers, helpers who rode with the drivers, dock workers who loaded the truck, warehousemen who brought the wares to the dock, checkers who checked that dock workers correctly loaded the trucks for a delivery route and filled orders correctly, clerks who processed orders, and traffic managers who ensured that warehouses had the right amount of goods. Now, how would you divide up these workers based on craft? Should they all be in separate unions, even if sometimes their jobs overlapped? In the event that one craft walks out, will the others follow? Or would they continue working because it's not their fight? It's hard to build solidarity and carry out successful strikes when workers are isolated. Organizers like Dunn and Skoglund understood that large-scale strikes could shut down whole industries, and therefore were more effective, which is why they organized Local 574 on an industrial basis. Meanwhile, Tobin did everything he could to prevent Local 574 from organizing workers or the strike. Notably, he put pressure on AFL's Central Labor Union to expel the Teamsters Local. 574's delegate voluntarily left the CLU, though not before getting sympathetic delegates from the council on record in support of the strike demands. By this point, the General Drivers Union's organizing committee had surpassed Teamsters' bureaucracy, which becomes clear when you look at how well the local organized in preparation of the May strike. One of the first support groups created was the Women's Auxiliary, organized primarily by Clara Dunn and Marvel Shaw, the wives of Grant Dunn and Farrell Dobbs. The organizers originally planned for the women to temporarily become members of Local 574. However, many rank-and-file members were opposed to or unsure of women joining the union, and found the idea of an auxiliary more attractive. They did not want their wives, mothers, or sisters participating in union activities which historian Brian D. Palmer described as a night out with the boys. The men came around when organizers pointed out the ways in which the women's auxiliary could help the union. They could cook meals for picketers, care for those injured, and visit local families to get support for the strike. It's important to note that the ideas for women's roles during the strike were traditional gendered roles, a topic I want to explore in the future. The main point I want to get across here is that women created the Women's Auxiliary to support the strike, and we're going to see how they did that in the next video. Ray Dunn and C.R. Hedlund met with unemployment leagues to organize an unemployed section of the union. The union wanted to show that relief for the thousands of jobless in Minneapolis was one of its goals, while adding to their ranks thousands of picketers who would otherwise be scabs. To create the next generation of organizers, older, experienced Trotskyists trained younger, up-and-coming militant unionists to develop their speaking skills. The younger militants then went out to local unions and convinced members to support 574 with charismatic speeches. These were people like Farrell Dobbs. Farrell? He was recruited into 574 and the Communist League of America, later becoming an organizer. The most ambitious project was the strike headquarters established at 1900 Chicago Avenue, where union carpenters and plumbers added stoves, sinks, and counters to create a commissary. The organizers also created an auditorium with a loudspeaker system that could broadcast to thousands of people around the block, organized a small hospital staffed by nurses and uni interns, created offices, installed telephones, and got a shortwave radio to monitor police activities. They even created an internal roadway where cars and trucks used for mobile pickets could be pushed in, because carbon monoxide is a thing, and receive fuel and tire service from mechanics. In the upper level, bunks were made so that strikers from the picket line could sleep between shifts. All this was possible thanks to the money donated from the governor, people, and businesses around the state, and of course, good old-fashioned union dues. In the days leading up to the 16th, strike captains were named and provided with instructions to telephone in every 10 minutes with updates. With all this in place, Local 574 was ready to meet the 166 trucking employers head-on. So this video looked at the events in Minneapolis prior to the Teamsters strike. While there were conditions unique to this period that don't make them exactly repeatable, I do think there are some lessons we can learn from them. With events like the Hunts Point strike and the union push at the Amazon plant in Bessemer, Alabama making headlines, we are seeing a renewed interest in unions and organized labor. Workers interested in organized labor are looking to the bureaucratic business unions of the AFL-CIO, which in many ways mirror the conservative AFL unions of the 1930s. We need leftists to join these unions to influence working-class people and introduce them to direct action and better organizational structures for unions. And before someone takes this out of context, I'm not saying that you shouldn't participate in leftist orgs. In fact, there's one leftist organization that I highly encourage you to be a part of, the IWW. Ray Dunn and Carl Skoglund were Wobblies who learned how to organize from the IWW. You can do that too. The IWW offers its members Organizer Training 101, where you'll learn how to develop a strategy for organizing so that you can do direct action in the workplace. It's important for leftists like us to be present in the labor movement where organization exists and create organization where there is none. When it comes to organizing an industry-wide strike, there's something we can learn here too. The organizers strategically chose to strike against employers when industries were most active, pressuring them to concede or risk losing out on much-needed profits. Timing is important. We also saw how organizers created mutual aid networks. They chose strike leaders and gave them instructions on how to lead, created the Women's Auxiliary, and organized unemployed workers to expand their ranks. They even created a headquarters where workers could rest and receive food. Without networks like these and so much more, a general strike is simply impossible today. Something that will become much more clear in the next video. Finally, we saw how the General Drivers Union carried out the February strike. They used strategic picketing, including the use of roving pickets to shut down the coal industry, with the exception of coal going to orphans, hospitals, and working class neighborhoods. Any modern general strike will need to be able to shut down industries while still supporting the groups who need it. And we'll see just how well Local 574 could do this in part 2. Thanks for watching. The next part talking about the 1934 Teamster strike will be out soon. A like, subscription, and share is much appreciated. I'll see y'all in part 2.